Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics. Adam Price has announced that he will resign as leader of Plaid Cymru. Following the damning Prosiect Pawb report released last week into Plaid's problems with misogyny, sexual harassment and workplace culture, we can now expect a leadership election over the summer, while Llŷr Griffith stands in as interim leader. While many will be focused on the political manoeuvres, and I am sure we will discuss those too, at the core of tonight's discussion are those people that spoke to Nerys Evans in her report. Whoever emerges as leader will not only need to inspire the members, but also ensure that the reforms promised are carried out, and the bravery of those who came forward is not forgotten. Joining me, Matt Hexter, to talk about everything that's happened in the last week or so, as always, is Kerry Davis. Hello, Kerry.
Evening, Matt. Evening, Rich.
He gave it away there. And Richard Martin. Hello, Rich. How are you?
Hey, chaps.
Rich, as our resident, Plaid bod, would you mind giving a brief summary of sort of how we've got to where we are now with Plaid Cymru?
I mean, it's a sorry tale, and it is absolutely infuriating that here we are. Instead of talking about, contributions to the civic and political life of Wales, which is the whole point of Plaid Cymru, we're talking about failures on behalf of Plaid Cymru, and specifically in recent times, the leadership of Plaid Cymru. We all know, and we have had on as guests in the past, people who have shared insight into the rumblings of discontent in the Senedd group at Plaid Cymru, and some of these predate even Adam Price's leadership. They existed in Leanne Wood's era as well. And, I myself personally know a number of people that have been part of the Plaid Cymru machine and have since left. And ultimately, this was bubbling away. And at some point, everyone knew that it would come to the surface. The way that it came to the surface, as you said, Matt, is a report written by a former guest on the podcast, Nerys. As I understand, they published an 80-plus point full summary of the report, didn't publish the whole report into the public domain. And in addition, there was other comments that came out either via personal statements or via journalists in Wales. And, the Hiraeth group chat has been alive with debate on this subject for some time. And I, for a long time, was convinced that this point was coming, but ultimately we wouldn't necessarily have this moment that we're talking about today of Adam Price having stepped down and an interim leader being put in place. But here we are. And I know if I sound a bit stilted, it's because I'm genuinely livid with a party and a party leadership that has for years not acted when it should have acted and has contributed to its own downfall. And through all of that time, there have been volunteers, members, staff members, and supporters across Wales, most of whom have no idea what has been going on, even now have no idea what's going on. And the party leadership in the Senedd, and I would say that it is confined to the Senedd group, and it is not the UK Parliament group or the local government group. They just have not taken the responsibility that they should have done. It's an absolutely disgraceful position that they found themselves in. And here we are. This week comes to a head. And Adam Price, I don't think I'm alone in thinking this. I thought for a long time there was an almost Johnsonian tendency to refuse to acknowledge political gravity. And I thought that things were going to continue for some time. But thankfully, somebody stood up and was counted, and here we are.
As you alluded to there, Rich, in our group chat over the last week or so, you were probably the most adamant that you didn't think there would be much change to the status quo, whereas me and Kerry had a funny feeling that something may happen. Kerry, what was your assessment of everything that's happened in the last week?
I've got to say, I struggle with this. I'm even uncomfortable doing the pod, so it's so fresh and raw, and I can't get away from the people. And I think we know some of the people who've discussed what's happened, and I can't get away from what they've been through. And for some of them, it's been over a number of years. It's been things that have come out in social media. People are obviously very distressed about what's happened. There was a post last week I saw about a previous chief exec who's experienced bullying. I'm a very irreverent person, and the gravitas of this I do struggle with a little bit, and it puts Plaid in a really, really difficult position. And although, we joke again, the irreverence, I'm on with the Green Party for a lot of my political life. I was supporting Plaid. And it was only when I had the ability to get more involved in politics, it was only through a blow of the wind on one particular or a few particular areas where I went green instead of Plaid. And today, I'm quite grateful that I did, because since I have been involved in politics, the Plaid kind of governance and oversight structure has been really, really poor. And I find it not a negative towards Plaid, as a lot in Wales will be. I find it really quite sad that, one of our great political institutions, it finds itself in this particular position.
I definitely didn't think that there was going to be any immediate change following the publication of the report. And actually, that's borne out. If you read the letters and the correspondence between Chair and former leader of Plaid Cymru, I don't think anybody thought that there was going to be any change, which was itself part of the problem. And, I hadn't been expecting that to be the case, because that's what I thought would be a good outcome. Actually, I thought that was just going to be the case because that's based on the dynamics involved. That's what it was going to be. But as you said, Matthew, the leaks changed everything, and the mounting pressure changed everything. And I think it was that combined effort that changed the circumstance. So what happened and what was involved in those leaks, and what do you think was the salient element of them that really tipped the balance?
I will get onto the leaks eventually, Rich, but I just want to focus very, very briefly on something you said, which is the resignation letter of Adam Price last night. And I found it very striking that essentially he was saying in that letter that he had wanted to resign, or at least allegedly he'd wished to resign when the Prosiect Pawb report came out last week, but he was talked into not doing so by Mark Jones, who's the chair of the Plaid Cymru NEC, by the author of the report, Nerys Evans, and also by the Plaid Cymru Westminster leader, Liz Saville-Roberts, which I just found, a hugely striking piece of information. But going back to it, this is this recent weekend, Saturday night gone, it came out that there had been leaked text messages between Plaid Cymru MSs and Plaid Cymru staffers, in which a number of Plaid Cymru MSs had seemingly, at the very least, failed to give their full support to Adam, but it seemed as though they had, lost confidence in his leadership. A number of these messages had gone back a number of months, so it's sort of indicative of a feeling within the Plaid Cymru group that Adam was not necessarily best placed to deal with the whole situation relating to the culture that had developed in the party, and eventually, again, obviously, the recommendations. And there was a feeling that he was not the person to, at least by the looks of it, within the Senate group, not the person to take forward the report and implement it. And I think it is important to note that from the report, that although the summary report does not mention Adam by name, it does say that the situation has got worse since 2018, which is obviously the year in which Adam was elected. So I can fully understand why a number of people were concerned after last week, when it didn't appear as though Adam was going to resign. He said himself that he felt that he was the best person to implement these changes, but somehow simultaneously, under his leadership, things had got worse. So I can really empathize and sympathize with the people who were absolutely distraught at the end of last week. But I do think these leaks and the impression that they gave that Adam had lost the confidence of his Senate group were very important in eventually building this pressure that resulted in him feeling as though he couldn't continue in that role. And then obviously we saw on, I want to say Tuesday night, like 5 minutes before Sharp End went out on the pre-record, which if the producer of Sharp End is listening, I bet they're still having some sort of flashback to their entire show being out of date. But Martin Shipton essentially wrote an article in Nation that said he had decided to resign. And then we had this very long, drawn-out process for another 24 hours where we saw the numerous meetings of the Senedd, Plaid Cymru Senedd, the messes, and eventually very late nights meeting of the Plaid Cymru National Executive meeting, and then eventually at about 11:15, the announcement that Adam was going to resign.
Yeah, I think let's not beat around the bush with too much with this. Although it is not explicit in the report, the leadership of Adam Price was part of the problem. And building on what Kerry said earlier, there has been a governance issue in Plaid Cymru for some time. In this, again, I have to stress, in the Senedd group specifically, and which I guess is also the leader's office in that regard. But as I understand it, and certainly listening to Liz Saville-Roberts talking on Radio 4 the other day, the initial response to this report, which was damning, and full credit to, again, friend of the pod, Will Hayward, was just screaming into the void about how damning this was and how little action or response there was from Plaid Cymru. I think the initial response within the party was, this is really bad. They published the report summary in, I say the summary in full, with a view to trying to be clear and transparent. And for whatever reason, there was a group decision that the most appropriate way forward would be to try and enact some kind of delivery on addressing the points in that report as a group, across the party, without necessarily making personnel changes. No one knows outside of the room what the basis of that decision was, but it's sort of indicative of some of the problems that Plaid Cymru has. That itself as a problem. They have since corrected it and appointed an interim leader. And that the point of that interim leader, and I'm, as far as I'm aware, I don't know if this has been published, but as far as I'm aware, that interim leader is standing as an interim leader only on condition that they then don't stand for the leadership. Is that correct? Is that in the public domain? I don't know.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So we basically now have an opportunity for Plaid Cymru to genuinely act on the basis of that report. And they won't deserve the support of their own teams if they don't act on it.
I just want to emphasize something about what you said really on Llŷr. I mean, he gave an interview to Dros Ginio, Radio Cymru this lunchtime, and he did emphasize that in his role as interim, he thinks he'll be able to sort of tackle some of the issues in a more firm manner than someone who, would eventually want to actually be leader.
Who would be courting support from and patronage. Absolutely.
Would be able to do, because he himself has no leadership ambitions beyond this period. So I think if he is tasked solely with making sure that the party that someone eventually takes over is in a better state, then that can only be beneficial for the party, but most importantly, again, for the people who work and volunteer for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what this means. There are a few kind of burning issues. I mean, obviously, there is the continuation of the work with the Welsh Government, the cooperation agreement. I mean, this is as I slightly angrily tweeting the other night, as I said, this is after the cleaning the stables moment. What are the actual priorities for Plaid Cymru now? Do they want to keep the cooperation agreement going? Does the Welsh Government want to keep the cooperation agreement going? What does Plaid Cymru do in terms of potential future leadership? And arguably in greater importance is what degree of self-reflection is there in the party about what sort of party they are and want to be? Is the cooperation agreement going to survive this period? My instinct is, I think it will have to. Mark Drakeford is invested in the outcome of it, and I think that, I don't know Llŷr particularly well, but from what I know of him, I think he will want to see some of those outcomes that Plaid Cymru has committed to as going ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just on the future of the cooperation agreement. So it's important to note that Mark Drakeford released a statement this afternoon that essentially said the cooperation agreement is an agreement between organizations rather than individuals. So, but he also did say that, of course, that in the light of developments, there will be a an evaluation of where we stand, essentially. But I don't think that anyone really thinks there's going to be a significant change to the operation of the agreement or the contents thereof. I think there has certainly been disquiet amongst certain Labour MSs, but I think that has been not exclusively, but primarily reserved among the people who sort of weren't particularly keen on the cooperation agreement anyway. I know that Labour MSs were meeting today, so I'm sure they would have had discussions about the continued future of the cooperation agreement, but I can't see there being any significant changes to it there.
And the new chief whip is an experienced hand at such matters.
Jane Hutt, for those who have not seen, is now the new chief whip, replacing Dawn Bowden. But
the longest serving Labour cabinet, longest serving Labour government minister in history?
Yeah,
question mark. Jane Hutt.
Very likely. Well, in England, Labour have never been in power that long, Rich. So probably. I do think that there's a year and a half left to run on the cooperation agreement. We're sort of halfway through.
Big ticket items still to come.
Big ticket items still to come. Everything that requires money, you've seen a bit of scaling back over the last year or so. If you're correct about Clear and he's looking for sort of the outcomes-based approach to the cooperation agreement, then certainly there's work to be done there. But I think the big ticket item we've all been sort of focusing on, the sort of bedrock of why this cooperation agreement even exists, is making sure that we can get Senedd reform through. I mean, there's a statement next week on electoral reform in the Senedd, so maybe we will see the sort of foundation, the green springs of that legislation coming soon. I personally cannot see an end to the cooperation agreement before that legislation passes.
100%. Well, at least I think that will be the intention, unless something unforeseen. It's a fairly narrow lane, is what I would say. That it is a fragile beast, and something could upset the apple cart if somebody wanted to. And I suppose it will be a test of those Labour backbenchers in particular, is how much apple cart upsetting are they up for? So we've got cooperation agreement. What other challenges have we got? Thinking about Plaid Cymru more permanent leadership.
I can't see with Plaid there's any kind of thought on that. The next steps for me for Plaid are to just, the reports are a week old. It's to step back, look at what's been said about the party, how it's governed, how it's structured, and rebuild. And I think the political nature of what it wants to do is secondary for me in the short term for what needs to come next. It really is clear as interim leader has a massive job to implement, and I haven't read the report, but the 82 recommendations to implement those, and that doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen quickly. So the cooperation agreement will continue as long as I suspect Mark Drakeford wants it to, and as you've said, it'll be there between the organisations as long as Mark wants it. But in terms of the political machinations, it's really circle the wagons for Plaid, rebuild that core which has been found to be so wanting, and then head towards the Senedd elections with that kind of new leader, whoever that may be, and in terms of which side of the party will come to the fore and will they be able to expand into these kind of areas. I don't even think that's on the cards at the moment.
Rich?
I actually think, unfortunately, Kerry, there's a general election, a UK general election this time next year, maybe a little bit later in the year. May could be later in the summer. Plaid Cymru has to fight that election, and it has to be ready on new boundaries. It is partly a question of leadership, but it's also partly a question of the party just being on an election footing. and they have to restructure. I mean, and as I said, they don't have a huge amount of resources to be able to do it. It's not like the Conservatives or the Labour Party. Whoever is elected leader proper in the summer has to hit the ground running, and very much hope that, should Clear, I mean, as inevitably will be the case, should Clear not have been able to implement all of the recommendations of the Neris Evans report, I hope that he will continue to have some kind of role in terms of making sure that report is implemented, even once the new leader is in place, because that new leader has to focus on the future and the things that are to come. And they have to map out some kind of strategy, because at the very least, they want to try and hold on to at least 2 seats in Westminster. And potentially, I would argue that Llŷn is possibly the leading challenger to Virginia Crosby and Ynys Môn, find a way to support him in that campaign, as well as fighting in every other constituency across Wales. So, unfortunately, the world isn't going to stop for Plaid Cymru to sort itself out and get its house in order and deal with the very real problems. It has to do 2 things at the same time. They have to address the report. They have to make good on the recommendations in that report. And that is probably going to take, I would hesitate to say years, but possibly years. And in the meantime, the party has got to continue to operate.
Yeah, I'd say it's very like the love him or loathe him, the Keir Starmer situation with the UK Labour Party. Sort of had to detoxify the party in the background, whilst also dealing with day-to-day politics. And whoever becomes the next Plaid Cymru leader will have to do the same. So I really don't want to make light of everything that's happened, but it is inevitable that we'll be on to the next thing really, really quickly.
This is something we've talked about, but so far this year we've had the fallout with the WRU in terms of these kind of areas as well. I think a number of the FAW board were suspended in certain aspects, and not to focus on other areas, but there's a Labour front bench story today. I haven't seen it, but I'm told there's one from yesterday I've missed. The history of the SNP with Alex Salmond is in this area. You look at the Conservatives in Wales and at Westminster, there's these kind of issues. It's a society problem. Is it a particular political problem? Does the political bubble culture kind of create an environment where this kind of situation happens? I'm not sure, but Plaid have got a chance to really address what's been found in their kind of position. And I think that for the remainder of this year needs to be a priority, obviously looking at general elections as well. But this has to be a focus for the new leader, I would think. But do you think the political bubble culture kind of creates scenarios where these kind of situations can occur more often than not?
I think that it's not necessarily a political problem, although, of course, these issues do seem to be profligate in politics. I think it's a problem wherever there are power dynamics and vast differences in power dynamics within our society. And I think politics is particularly bad for it. I mean, one, we hear about it a lot, but we've also seen it recently at the CBI. In politics, so much is to do with your relative position to X and Y and Z. The feeling that in political parties especially is you don't do anything that could potentially harm the party. So you've seen historically a lot of people who only feel like they can come forward with complaints years later. There was a very famous one where a Labour MP came forward, I want to say maybe a decade later, because when the let's say alleged incident happened, they weren't an MP, but the person who had occasioned the harassment was. And they had been fearful for their progression within the party, their reputation within the party. All these horrific power dynamics are at play all the time with these things. And I've seen it myself, people who don't want to come forward because if they come forward, their reputation within the party is ruined. And maybe there was a selection that they wanted to go for in a year's time or what have you. And it's abhorrent, and it has to stop. But parties tend to be so defensive and have historically been so defensive that it can really have a negative impact on your reputation if you come forward. There is so much to do on this, and it is a plague on all our houses. Every political party has got a dark history in this area. There are ways we can do it. I think we need a complete reform of political HR. I mean, the Senate is significantly better than Westminster, but Westminster, basically every MP's office runs like it's a little own small business. If you have a HR issue, the only person you can go to is usually the person who's occasioned the incident that caused the HR issue. So it is not a well-designed system. It has not been a historically transparent and accountable system. And unfortunately, staff members are incredibly replaceable. So like I said, going back to the very first bit of what I was saying to you, Kerry, I don't think it is inherently a political problem. It is particularly bad in politics. But I think that goes straight back again to the fact that we are talking about an area with significant power dynamic issues. And I think that is what's fundamental to why this problem has been so profligate in politics.
What does happen now in terms of the Plaid process, Rich? Has that been communicated at all? Obviously, Clear now is interim leader. The rules of the party suggest that he can't put his name forward for long-term leader. But are we looking at a summer leadership campaign?
Yeah, it will be the summer. I mean, the Plaid Cymru is unusual in that it has, as part of its constitution, leadership. The leadership can be contested every 2 years anyway, and it normally would stick to that cycle. And if you remember, the somewhat irregular situation around Leanne being challenged in 2018 for leadership and the subsequent victory, which was fully within constitutional kind of party rules, but was considered to be, was considered to be done in a less subtle way than might have anticipated. However, as with all of these things, the party can be responsive and will, although it is so fresh, the rules haven't been clarified exactly how it will be run. My understanding would be that it would be a conventional Plaid Cymru leadership election at a point to be determined some point this summer, once I think they have an understanding about what the terms of Llyr's interim leadership are going to be and what would be a reasonable point at which to make that decision. And then, of course, we'll get into the point, at some point there will be, inevitably, people will start declaring an interest in the near future. We touched on it earlier that there are still, I think it's fair to say, two camps, although I slightly disagree with the framing that you have a somewhat left-wing South Wales set of MSs and a more centrist, one would argue, rural set of MSs that might contend it. I think that there are also some relatively left-wing rural MSs that might also contest it as well.
I was going to say, I'm sure Mabon will be on us now for having suggested anything of the sort.
Yeah, indeed, absolutely. So, so it's going to be difficult. This is not going to be like a normal election, because I still think that although there is an imminent UK general election, the big target for the party will be to try and stabilise, correct course and stabilise and be on a good footing to compete in 2026, when the expanded Senedd is expected to be elected. That will be seen as the test of success will be the party's performance in that election. But for the party, there has to be a period of self-reflection. I don't think it's, the Plaid Cymru is not like the Conservative Party at Westminster, where it will just churn through leaders and then be fully committed. What is it? What's the phrase? An absolute monarchy regulated by regicide is the phrase that's often bandied around. That's not Plaid Cymru. Plaid Cymru actually has to have some kind of identity, and it has to have some kind of purpose, sense of coherent purpose about what it is trying to do. Because what it can't do is be the competitor to the Conservatives in rural Wales, or competitors with Lib Dems as was, and the competitor to Labour in the valleys on the same policy platform. That just does not compute. And we've seen criticism of this, and we mentioned Keir Starmer earlier. You cannot, in 2023 do what you might have been able to do in 1923, which is campaign as the same party on a totally different platform in different territories. So it's actually, best case scenario, a period of creative destruction for Plaid Cymru. There has to be an acknowledgement that what has gone before has not gone well, and there's actually an opportunity for renewal under good leadership. And also, you know, I don't think you can ignore the fact that the parliamentary group, the UK parliamentary group, although they're tiny, you know, there's only 3 of them at the moment, they've actually managed to enhance their reputation. And I almost would encourage them to be more visible within the campaign than perhaps they would have been otherwise if it had been a regular campaign. So, yeah, election in the summer.
Do you think there's any chance of any kind of change in Plaid's constitution for its leader then? And it would be ironic if, I think, one time Adam Price's suggestion of having a co-leader of male and female would be something that could develop. Or, interestingly, and I only came up with this when you were just talking, that the leader of the party could well be someone who isn't a Senedd member, simply because I think to address some of the issues that the report has highlighted, it doesn't have to be that political leader within the Senedd to take that kind of position.
I don't think that there's going to be any change on the constitution with regards to leader, but I tell you what, it would be a wonderful, wonderful thing for Plaid Cymru to do, would be to accept that the governance structure of the party has been dysfunctional for some time, and that there could be a role for either the members from local government or from the UK Parliament to play an more active and visible role in that. That would be very welcome from my point of view. But it would be against the very nature of Plaid Cymru that sees the people of Wales, representing the people of Wales, as the primary purpose of the party, for that leader not to be from the Senedd group. I mean, that just would be inconceivable, I think. But I do think that, you know, if the party is willing to think creatively and honestly with itself, that there could be a role for people from other parliaments and local government, and maybe not co-leadership. I mean, you know, I think it's very difficult to look back on that proposal now and think back about how realistic or even sensible it was. I mean, it was ill-conceived at the time, and I don't think anything like that could ever be proposed again. And weirdly, hasn't been proposed since 2018. It's funny that.
No, I mean, you'll have experience of this with the Green Party, Kerry. You seem to do co-leaders very well, but I think that proposal implied was a little bit of a Trojan horse rather than a genuine proposal. It
was. But I just wonder whether it would be a way for Plaid to address some of the issues that have come out. In having co-leaders gives a kind of secondary option for people who've got concerns to go to, and addresses some of the issues we've talked about tonight and have been written about.
The role of chair or the role of party president could be reappraised, I think, as being a counterweight to the leader's office, because part of the problem of the leader's office, and the criticisms of the leader's office, or the implied criticisms of the leader's office in this report by Nerys, are not dissimilar to some of the criticisms, fair or unfair, of the leader's office under Leanne. And the problem, therefore, I think that the party, the Senedd group specifically, has to figure out is how the Senedd group and the leader's office integrate with each other, and avoid some of the either clique-based thinking or groupthink about what is and what isn't appropriate in that relationship. I think that is a big issue. It is a big issue, and hopefully they'll come up with some kind of creative and viable solution to that.
Some of the comments, I think Liz Saville Roberts spoke in the way she spoke about Adam and his legacy. It did sound in some ways as a kind of farewell kind of approach. Did you think that, Matt, or have you got any thoughts on where we are with Adam's legacy?
I mean, realistically, I think his legacy as leader will have to be one of sort of misjudgment, error, and failure to advance. I think that Adam was gifted this mass growth in Yes Cymru, and with a membership that was bigger than even Plaid Cymru's party membership. And he sort of failed, I think, to understand exactly why people had grasped hold of the Yes Cymru movement, and then interpreted that as his green light to turn the entire Plaid Cymru 2021 Senate election into an election about independence and about him. There had always been an intention to turn it into a sort of presidential style election. And of course, that intention did not touch reality over the COVID years, because if anybody had really been thinking about what Plaid's political strategy going into the 2021 Senate election should have been, is one that focused on the economic and health challenges as a consequence of the pandemic, not a vague, to many people, constitutional issue such as independence, and also fighting a presidential election against the man who probably still is, but certainly was that time, the most well-known man in Wales, let alone the most well-known politician, and a widely liked politician. So why Plaid Cymru didn't have the sort of political dynamism to reshape that campaign? They had months. They knew when that campaign was going to be, and yet they knew how popular Mark was, and they knew that independence wasn't going to be a sellable issue on the door, and yet still somehow under Adam's leadership they walked straight into failed election campaign in which they made very limited steps forward. If you compare that to the other parties, and I think that electorally, anyway, Adam's leadership can't be seen as anything but a failure. And I think you go back to the local elections in last year. Yes, I am sure we had this conversation at the time, and people will say, well, Plaid Cymru lead significantly more councils than they did before that election. And yes, whilst the colour on the map is now green instead of grey, Plaid Cymru were leading those councils, albeit in coalition or minority run councils. Before that point, they made some very small advances in Yvro, in an area they have been historically strong, and were able to take those councils. However, in South Wales, where they have been trying to break through, they went backwards in RCT in a historic way. And I think that is, unfortunately, what a lot of the legacy of Adam's leadership has been in political electoral terms, is maintaining strength in the Yvro, keeping comfortable, and in the space you understand, talking about issues such as independence, which Plaid Cymru voters and people in the Yvro have always been much more comfortable with and much more in favour of, yet abandoning the potential votes that they could have won in South Wales, where under Leanne, Plaid had started to really make a step forward, and yet they've just retreated. And this is what I feel like they've done. Plaid Cymru have retreated into their heartlands where they feel most comfortable and safe, and just completely abdicated any responsibility they have when, especially in other parts of Wales, especially when they purport to be the party of Wales. So that's just dealing with it electorally. So for the prince that was promised, he's delivered very little. And he's certainly not moved, I don't think, the case for Welsh independence. He's certainly not advanced Plaid Cymru's cause. I mean, you can make an argument that the cooperation agreement has done a lot of work in terms of getting Plaid Cymru policies on the statute book, implementing changes that Plaid Cymru would like to see if they were in government. But I don't know if that's enough. If 4.5 years of this grand dynamic change, heralded in by the most awkward video we've ever seen on social media, I honestly think Plaid Cymru have gone backwards in the last 4.5 years.
Rich, I notice you grimacing a little bit and generally unhappy with that, but I'd say that's probably a fair summation. Would you have a different view?
I'm not going to mount a huge campaign to say that the last 5 years have been an enormous success for Plaid Cymru. I would encourage all of our listeners to remember that there is a variety of political backgrounds on the podcast, and we see things through different lenses from time to time. So trying to put aside the stuff that we have talked at length about in the report, which is important, but we're trying to talk about other things. It is important to remember that Plaid Cymru is not in the position that the Welsh Liberal Democrats are in, which is borderline extinction in terms of elected representatives. Plaid Cymru did increase by 1 their representation in the Senedd in the last election. Plaid Cymru has essentially continued to be, arguably, the think tank for the Welsh Labour government, and has provided an awful lot of energy in the debate about policy and direction of the government in the Senedd, and also has brought to the fore some important policies which will have, for some people in Wales, really transformative, positive impact. And, the poster child for that is the free school meal things, which, not everybody is fully supportive of, but there will be some families in Wales that will have benefited from that and will continue to benefit from that from years to come. So there are good things that have happened in Plaid Cymru over the last few years, but most people in the party would hope that there are better times ahead.
What is ahead? Have you got any kind of thoughts on who may well be putting their hats in the ring for leader? Never mind who might win as leader.
I have a few thoughts, but in the spirit of fun, let's do a little round table. Matt, do you want to go first?
Okay. So I think the rumor mill has started to spin, and I think the hero for WhatsApp was ablaze this afternoon as we have sort of started to digest some of those rumors. So there is I believe there is a rumor that Sioned Williams has got a website ready for her leadership campaign. So I don't think you can necessarily rule out Sioned at this point in time. I think it's also interesting to note that Kevin Campbell, when asked 4 times this afternoon by Sky News, refused to rule out standing for leader. Obviously Kevin Campbell has been fairly quiet, even amongst Senedd watchers in the last year and a half, as he's a designated member, but a very astute politician. So I wouldn't rule out Kevin having a go either.
I mean, we're almost taking pot shots. I think that there are a very, very small number of credible candidates, and I know that will be disappointing to the ambitious members of the Senedd in the Plaid Cymru group, but I can't think of more than 2 or 3 names that will make it to even a shortlist. I would humbly suggest that those 3 names would probably be Delith Jewell, Sioned Williams, and also I think Mabon. We talked about Mabon earlier. I think that there is, almost all of these people are new to the Senedd. You've got to remember that, almost the entire group has come in the last decade, and I don't think that any of them are the finished article yet. But if you want me to put my head on the block, which, yeah, why not? I'll do it. I think I genuinely think that the most likely winner of a leadership election will be Mabon ap Gwynfor. I think there is talent, there is a very astute mind, but frankly, look at the electorate. Who is the electorate for the Plaid Cymru election? Is Plaid Cymru members, and if your name ends in ap Gwynfor, then you have a lot of goodwill already, no matter what your policy platform is. And I just think that you combine those prospects with, the brand recognition for Plaid Cymru MS is pretty low. Let's be honest about it. And if your name is ap Gwynfor, then you have a heads up on other people. And I don't think it would be right. I think Rhun ap Iorwerth is charting the right course for him, and I don't think he will be persuaded to change that course. And I think that's the right thing to do.
Gary, what are your thoughts on the next leader of Plaid Cymru and who the candidates might be?
As someone who's kind of quite well informed in Welsh politics, I know all the names. I'm looking at them all now. I've worked with a number of them. I'm really impressed by a number, and I think the ones I know most well and have been impressed by you've assured me, aren't able to or aren't going to stand. But I do wonder whether, there's time to reflect here. And I do think what I suggested around a shared leadership with someone like Dareth Jewell in the urban southeast and someone like Sioned in the more traditional west side of it, or a male-female split. I think there's an opportunity here for Plaid to take stock and look at something different. And as you two know, I do go down the radical route, and I think now's the time that there's a possibility to do that. So I mean, it'll be a really interesting one, and I'm sure we'll podcast on it this summer.
Indeed. I think it's important we end tonight's pod in the same way we started it, sort of by thinking about those who have been affected by what's gone on in Plaid Cymru, but also in other political parties and across society as a whole with these sort of incidents. Those who've been bullied, harassed, subject to misogyny. It's part of a wider problem in society. And if anyone is suffering with any of these issues, there are good people you can speak to, and we will, I'm sure, attach a link to some resources in the show notes. But thank you very much for listening. It's a pleasure, as always, to speak to my fellow co-hosts, Richard Martin. Rich, if people want to find out more from you on Twitter, where can they go?
Yeah, you can find more predictions that will probably not come to pass at Mimosa Cymru on Twitter.
Thank you also to Kerry Davis. Kerry, where can people find you on Twitter?
I'm still Kerry the Viking.
Wonderful. And you can find more of my insane ramblings about baking bread and politics at Hexter101. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard this evening, please don't forget to find Hiraeth on all the socials at HiraethPod, or go to our website, www.walespolitics.com. And thank you very much for supporting us with your ears. But if you would like to do so with your wallet, you can go to www.patreon.com/HiraethPod. Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review.